Hello and welcome to Glitchy Switch, the podcast all about what it feels like discovering you have ADHD as an adult. My name is Martin and I believe that no one deserves to live in shame in a world not designed for them. So in each episode, I'll pick off the kind of questions that go through your mind on the journey from curiosity to diagnosis. Whether you're on your own journey or supporting someone who is, I hope my own experiences might just help you. I know what it's like to have a busy life and a busy mind, so each episode lasts about as long as a cup of coffee so you can easily fit it in and enjoy without draining too much energy. This week we're answering another career-related question, this time about the working experience when you have ADHD. We spend most of our time at work, so it stands to reason our ADHD traits must have a major impact on how we experience it. In my experience, this is absolutely true, and my particular experience of working in and with large corporations has been, I would say, kind of an equal measure, a relief and a bit of a trial at times. Again, we're kind of getting into one of those topics, and I feel like I'm saying this to you every week, but it is kind of a meatier one. So I'm going to add my usual, as it's now become, caveat, that we might come back and go deeper in bits of this later on. But we can at least talk about some of the major concepts of it, if you like. God, it even sounded corporate, but, apologies. First, a bit of a level set, because my experience of work is based on a particular type of company. I've worked for 3 employers whilst in full-time work, all of them being technology companies headquartered out of the United States, all with numbers of employees measured in at least tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in at least one case. I started my career in 1996, which in my head feels like yesterday. I was only 19. There we go. But looking back, so much has changed, not just in the business world, but in the culture of business as well. Where I am today is different, not least because of how I approach coming here, and also I think the attitude of the people that I came to work for as well. But first, a bit of a primer about how many such companies are often set up if you're not from that world. Big companies tend to be very structured, and in the world of big business, the holy grail, if you like, is to have everything done in highly repeatable ways on the basis that you can either automate stuff or otherwise you can get it done as cheaply as possible by a human. The theory is that the more variation there is in how you do things, the more chance that profits are lost in mistakes and digressions from the most efficient ways of doing things. If you break the work down into small, well-defined enough bits, it means that it can be done as cheaply as possible because you reduce the amount of brain power and therefore cost that's needed. This then, of course, means that roles and responsibilities, or at a minimum the way people are measured when they do them, tend to be fairly rigid and well-defined and established in a centralised way, usually in my experience from somewhere in a very different time zone. Even the people management side of big corporations tends to be fairly tightly scripted, and ultimately your line manager is essentially there to try and make sure that they get the best performance out of you within that structure that the company has set. And all of this, I should say, that sounded a bit negative, but all of this I completely get, because to manage a really, really big organisation on that scale, you have to have some way of simplifying matters because there's just so much of it. It does, however, make life very uncomfortable at times if you're neurodivergent and have an unusual blend of things you're good at and work in a different way. I think I've said before, I've always felt like a bit of a square peg in a round hole generally in life, and never more so than during my career, which is now almost 3 decades long. In my career, I've largely done slightly unusual or niche sort of roles in some way, either working with really new technology, so it requires some creativity and curiosity, which you might recall are 2 ingredients that keep my ADHD brain interested, or similarly working with customers who are at least slightly unusual to my company or the norms of the kind of customers that they deal with. The thing is, those roles are the exception rather than the rule. I'm essentially a very technical person by upbringing, and you may remember us talking about how I'd hyper-focused on code and reverse engineering programs that were on a computer when I was in my teens. The thing is, I'm also very creative, and I loved art at school as well as being a very people-oriented person. Now, my experience of technical careers in big technology companies is that the roles typically assume you can be strong in a maximum of 2 out of 3 of those things, which is why I've often found myself something of an edge case and at times felt a bit misunderstood. The great thing about my current firm is that we actually started talking about this combination at the outset, and they actively welcomed and sought that. And I'm just so grateful for it, because I really did genuinely turn up just as me and said, look, this is what I'm good at. This is what I enjoy. It's these 3 things that I need in my work to keep me excited. And they were like, okay, we want people that looks like that, which was a really, really powerful moment, you might say. So we all kind of knew what we were signing up to, which again was a new experience for me. I think in previous times I'd have found a role, and obviously there's always some give and take in any kind of job that you go, everybody has to kind of accommodate a little bit, but I think in the past I'd always taken it on myself that I had to bend myself in some ways quite out of shape to fit into a particular identikit. My default position would be to blame myself if I started to feel the discomfort of having to do that. Anyway, whilst fun, those niche roles tend to have a shelf life, because with things like new technology, if I've done my job right, it becomes mainstream. And when it's mainstream, you need less creativity and curiosity because you're into that much more predictable machine. And that then gets boring. And if you're an ADHD person and bored, it's extremely hard work to stay motivated to perform at the levels you need to. I typically will spin up side projects to try and keep me nourished, which helps. And most employers will love you for doing extra work they're not paying you more for. But the problem is you get so into the side projects, it just makes you more frustrated when you reach a point where you can't spend much more time on it. You can also, it's no surprise, get burned out quite quickly, which obviously isn't ideal either. I've always managed to keep performing when I've been bored, though, which in some cases makes matters worse, because if you're doing everything everyone expects of you and more, absolutely everybody is happy apart from you. And if you're reliably delivering the goods and then some, people really don't want you to leave. The good thing about really big companies like the ones I've worked for is that you can leave a role without leaving the company, so you can get the benefit of doing something fresh without the upheaval of changing firms. I've moved around a few times in my career, pretty much always with the blessing of my line management. I did have one manager try and turn that in on me, though looking back, I can see that person, had kind of homed in on my sensitivity to rejection, which is an ADHD thing, and tried to use it as a lever. That also highlights one element of big organisations, is that they tend to be quite political in the sense of people seeking to try and gain, or in that particular case, keep power, which means, they can be a tough place for an ADHD person to hang out on a day-to-day basis, depending on what it is you do. All of that said, though, I must say that I can see how being in that structured world has been right for me. When I was diagnosed with ADHD, the psychiatrist pointed out that the expectations and my highly structured secondary education in particular, whilst painful at times, have provided a set of sort of, kind of guardrails that had kept me on the straight and narrow. Being part of big work machines, I think, has helped me in a similar kind of way, because they've provided the comfort of structure. And as I've described, by virtue of their very scale, you tend to get little niches that I've been able to find to go in and do my thing. I'm not sure I could have been a business owner or an entrepreneur, simply because I think I'd have found that far too stressful and unstructured, which is ironic because within the supporting structure of the big companies I've worked for, I'm very entrepreneurial in my behaviour. Because of my creativity and love of being around people, I can usually get things done. But, such is the ADHD experience. Innovation is a big word in the technology world because the speed at which stuff changes is so fast, and the competition often so fierce, that companies need to be coming up with new and different ways to solve problems all the time. And being a divergent thinker, as I am, definitely helps. And when I was at IBM, actually, I invented over 30 patents for the company, which I'm still really proud of today. You have to manage the tendency, though, and try and harness it. because of the way the structured world works. But I actually think this is a good thing, because that structure gave me comfort and focus and discipline. Sometimes it can get frustrating, but I realised that I probably needed some buffers to bounce off, even if they stung a little bit at times. I'm realising now that any one of these areas I've rambled off on today, we could go deeper on. And I'm going to finish up with what I think we'll come to see as our first conversation about corporate life by talking about the growth of allyship as a thing in companies. One really great thing I've seen grow over my career is the room particularly big corporates have made to foster dedicated work groups to try and create more inclusive cultures. When I was diagnosed, my company's neurodiversity ally group had a chat channel, and the relief of finding people like me was just so great. I could go and talk with them about, how I was really feeling, and I would get, in equal measure, advice and sometimes just support and friendliness. For balance, diversity and inclusion has become a kind of corporate responsibility ticket to the game, which I'm aware of, but my experience is that it has at least created a space and room to talk about experiences not just of ADHD people, but all neurodivergences. In this past year, it's actually become what I've come to see as a next sort of motivational wave in my career to try and improve the experiences of neurodivergent people like me in my industry where I've made my working life. I'm just one person, but I'd love to think that in the remaining 20 or so years I have to work, I could at least make a little dent of some kind on it. So that was a very, very quick first canter through the corporate experience. Next time, we're going to get into one of the things that really makes my heart sing. And that, my friends, is music. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. You can get in touch via glitchyswitchpodcast@gmail.com with your thoughts and suggestions of things you'd like to hear about. You can also follow me on @glitchyswitchpodcast on Instagram for more on ADHD life and to find out what's coming next.